The federal government introduced some of its first pieces of legislation last week, including the One Canadian Economy Bill. The bill is something Mark Carney promised through the campaign, legislation to strengthen Canada's economy in the face of Trump's tariffs. Its goal, to cut trade barriers and speed up nation-building infrastructure like energy projects and pipelines. And this all comes after the First Minister's meeting in Saskatoon, where premiers pitched their own priorities to the federal government. Tim Hodgson is the new Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. Minister Hodgson, nice to see you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I want to talk about many things, but I'll start with the legislation. The Prime Minister made it very clear that there has to be a consensus in order for a project, whether it's a pipeline or something else, to go ahead, a consensus with provinces and Indigenous peoples. Of course, a consensus doesn't mean everyone has to agree. It just means there has to be broad agreement. How do you get there? How do you reach a consensus?
Yeah. So I'd like to back up for your viewers and just talk about where we are.
Sure.
We have had a trade war declared on us. We didn't ask for it, but we're in it, and we have to win. What the Prime Minister has said is to win that war, we need to do things we have not done before,
sure,
build things we have not built before, and we need to do it at a speed we haven't done in generations. Like he's used the example, we haven't done it since World War II. Mm-hmm. As part of that process, we have started at an early stage a discussion with provinces and with territories. Mm-hmm. We saw that in yep, Saskatoon. We've also been doing it with proponents on the industry side. We've been doing it with proponents on the Indigenous side. Mm-hmm. And the idea is to bubble these projects up, define what are projects in national yep, interest, and then prioritize and get them built, because we have a short period of time right, to retool our economy and rebuild our economy.
So all good context. Let me drill down a little bit into some of the things. Timeline. You would like these things to be built in 2 years, approved in 2 years? What is the goal in terms of how quickly it gets done?
Once a project is identified yes, as a project of national interest, yep, it will be approved within 2 years. That is the timeline. So what we're saying as the Prime Minister, let's say, not if, but how.
Okay.
So we conclude that it is a project of national interest, and that's a process of
sure,
consultation. At that point, a list of conditions are provided, which will be publicly available. Mm-hmm. Everyone will see them. They will ensure part of those conditions we will honor our environmental responsibilities. Yep. We will honor our obligations to consult with Indigenous people. Then what we need to do, and this major projects office needs to do, is retool how we do things so we get that done within 2 years.
Okay, you identify the project. To identify the project, you already know that there is a private proponent, that Indigenous communities are on side, that provinces agree. Is that the first hurdle they have to clear before you get to the conditions?
So it's a collective. There's 5 in the legislation. Mm-hmm. One of them is it has to be beneficial to Indigenous peoples. Okay. I think that the Prime Minister said that typically would mean Indigenous ownership as a standard. Yep. There'll be some situations where that might not be what Indigenous people want, but that's sort of a standard, and that it will need to honor our obligations to climate change.
You've talked about a grand bargain to describe what will happen with the country in Alberta, as has the Premier of Alberta. What does that mean? That we're going to get more pipelines, but only if we deal with climate change? What's the bargain?
In Saskatoon, we spent quite a bit of time talking about 2 particular examples that bubbled up from the premiers. Mm-hmm. One was the Western Infrastructure Corridor, which they're now calling port to port to port, mm-hmm, or the Western Arctic Corridor, and then the Eastern Energy Partnership. If you look at both of those initiatives, in those corridors, you would see many, many types of infrastructure. You would see ports, you would see roads, you would see railways, you would see transmission lines. On the East Coast, you might see offshore wind. Right. You might see onshore wind that delivers clean hydrogen to Europe. There's a number of these. What we talked about was putting those together in combinations which are a net benefit to Canada. One of them is obviously carbon capture and carbon mm-hmm, sequestration. Mm-hmm. One of the things that was talked about was if we were going to move forward with a pipeline, it would be done in conjunction with a major effort around carbon sequestration. The Pathways Alliance is something that has been put forward by the 6 large proponents. It would significantly decarbonize the oil sands. That would be an important part of this process.
One of the things that the Prime Minister said and others have said is decarbonized oil. That doesn't exist, obviously. That is a gross contradiction. Oil contains carbon. So what are we supposed to understand by that?
So look, the carbon the Canadian industry has been incredibly innovative. It has used technology over the years to reduce its carbon footprint.
Sure.
I have watched
Sure.
the carbon intensity of a barrel of oil from Canada has been going down and down and down. The Pathways Initiative would significantly reduce the carbon footprint from the oil sands, as much as 30%. That is a big positive step forward.
So that's how you define decarbonized oil?
It is applying new technologies to reduce the carbon footprint of each barrel of oil.
One of the problems with the Pathways Alliance, though, as you know, is that it has been kind of at a standstill for many years, really. And a recent study says that it would be very hard for it to even break even, that it is probably not going to be sustainable if there is no government funding behind it. Is that something the government would be willing to get involved in order to reach these goals?
I think the government has said in particular situations where there is support from other governments, like provinces, we are prepared to put money to work to catalyze things. I'll use the example of LNG, because I think that's a success story that Canadians don't really understand. We had no LNG industry 5 years ago. With the support of the provincial government in British Columbia and the federal government, we put roughly $1 billion to work. There's been almost $60 billion of private sector investment, much of it resulting in Indigenous ownership, to build an LNG business in British Columbia that produces the cleanest LNG in the world. That is a win for Canada. That is a win for everybody. Speaking
of British Columbia, they are not interested in any further pipelines going to the West Coast. If a province says we don't want this, is this dead on arrival, these ideas that the Premier of Alberta has?
So I think what we heard when we were in Saskatoon is that we're looking at a totality of what happens. I think if there is a hypothetical oil pipeline with nothing else, we've heard the answer. There's a whole bunch of things that can be done.
Ways to convince them to do it. Is that what you mean?
There are all kinds of things that what I saw was all of the premiers coming together saying, hey, if we all work together, we all do things that help.
Premier Eby wasn't there, so I'm not sure that that's the case for him.
his deputy premier was there, and I'm not going to speak for the Prime Minister or the Premier of British Columbia, but I think they talk fairly regularly.
So you don't think that a no from BC is an actual no? That there's possibilities there?
We're talking about a hypothetical project.
Sure, but the idea, all of them are hypothetical, or most of them are hypothetical.
What I heard, what I heard in Saskatoon was everyone saying, let's look at real projects with real proponents. Let's figure out what the end goal is, and let's find a way to get there.
Okay, I'll end on this. Pierre Poilievre, Daniel Smith, they both say if you really want to get projects done, and I imagine they're talking mostly about oil and gas, you've got to get rid of the cap on oil and gas emissions, you've got to get rid of the industrial carbon price, you've got to get rid of C69. Are any of those pieces on the table, or are you trying to operate within the confines of those things?
What the Major Projects Office will do is define a set of criteria about what needs to happen for a project to move forward. A result. We will then figure out how we get there within the construct. At the same time, we are going to be looking at what we learn about how we could adjust legislation in a way that honors our commitment to climate change and honors our commitment to consultation. I don't think it's realistic to rip up our Environmental Protection Act, to rip up the act that dictates Indigenous consultation. People have tried that before. It results in nothing getting built, and we just spend time in court. What we need to do is have a process where we can talk about particular projects, lay out clear conditions for them moving forward, so that the private sector has certainty about what they do if they're going to commit capital, and then we move forward and then we build.
Minister, I hope you'll come back. We'll have lots to talk about in the months ahead, I suspect.
I hope so, too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We did request a Conservative to come on this program to respond to the new legislation, but as is often the case, the party did not respond to our request. As you just heard, provinces play a key role in these infrastructure projects. Rebecca Schulz is Alberta's Environment Minister, and she joins me live this morning. Nice to see you, Minister.
Great to see you as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we really appreciate getting your perspective, given how important Alberta is to some of these projects and ideas. You just heard there from Tim Hodgson. What do you make of the legislation and how it has the potential to impact your province?
You know, I think unfortunately at this point, we're still seeing a lot of talk because there still remains, as was your last question, a lot of questions about policies that are driving capital investment out of Alberta and out of Canada. It's one thing to say, look, we're going to build projects in the national interest. Obviously, that is an encouraging sign from the federal government. Alberta has been very clear that a bitumen pipeline up through Northwest BC would significantly impact the economy and GDP of Alberta and Canada and is one of our top priorities. But again, if we continue to see policies like an emissions cap, which I call a production cap because it is, a net zero electricity grid regulation, the methane targets that again infringe on areas of provincial jurisdiction. If we continue to see those policies remain, we will not be able to attract the capital to fill those pipelines and continue to be an energy superpower, but also maintain our energy security, national security, and affordability for Canadians.
Okay, so that's one set of problems that you would like to see addressed. The other is, frankly, other provinces, right? I'm sure you know British Columbia has said we do not want another pipeline running through British Columbia. The Prime Minister says a consensus has to be built. A consensus obviously doesn't mean everyone has to agree, but what is Alberta willing to do to try to get British Columbia on board?
You know, I think that's one of the challenges is what does the federal government define as consensus? Our premier is working very closely with premiers across the province to look at places where we can find common ground to get things built and make sure that we are working in the interests of provinces across our country. But of course, you know, like if we want to talk about consensus, there certainly wasn't consensus when the Liberals brought in Bill C-69, Bill C-48, an oil and gas production cap, a clean electricity regulation. So that should be, quite frankly, all the rationale they need to step away from those policies. But I will say that our premier has been very clear. She's having very positive conversations with premiers across the country, including Premier Canoe. I know she and Premier Eby have had a number of conversations, Premier Moe, and they are working together to see how we can find a way forward. I think this matters. It matters for jobs. It matters for energy security. It matters for the overall environmental goals, I would say, of even other nations who are looking to us to supply the safe, affordable, reliable, and responsibly produced energy that the world is looking for right now.
The thing that Minister Hodgson talked about there, the Western Arctic Corridor, what should we understand about what the opportunities would be for Alberta there? Is that the idea that a pipeline could run potentially to the port of Churchill? Where are the other opportunities if it's not British Columbia?
Yeah, you know, coming out of the Premier's meetings or the First Minister's meetings last weekend, that was also a project that our Premier has talked about as an opportunity. Of course, our top priority is that bitumen pipeline through to Northwest BC, but Port of Churchill could also be an important corridor for us from an energy perspective. And those are some of the conversations that the premiers and the Prime Minister are having right now. I think, though, this challenge still remains. And I know that the Prime Minister and Minister Hodgson have heard this from industry, that we can build all the pipelines we want if they continue to leave in place all of the problematic investment-killing policies that the former Liberal administration brought in, that we will continue to be in this position where we're not able to meet our goals as an energy superpower and build our Canadian economy and expand our trade relationships outside of the United States.
Though a pipeline was built under the previous Liberal government in spite of those factors. So I do wonder, there does seem to be sort of an openness to being flexible within the parameters of those pieces of legislation, as you just heard from the minister. And I do wonder whether just the commitment to get projects going isn't enough to attract some of that private capital and investment. Have you seen that? Do you think that that could still happen, even though you'd rather the government get rid of what you C-69 and a couple other things?
Yeah, and this isn't just about us. This is what industry is saying and what industry has said to the Energy Minister and the Prime Minister. They've been very clear that the Liberal policies over the last 10 years, but specifically the last 4, have created a chill on investment, both in our energy industry, but it also stalls out all of that new technology that we want to see when it comes to emissions reduction and continuing to be the responsible producer of choice. And so for us, it's both. We'd like to see both of these issues addressed. I think hearing a federal government talk about pipelines and being an energy superpower, I think that's encouraging. I think it's, I believe our Premier has said we're going to be cautiously optimistic. We're setting up a negotiating team. We want to be having those conversations with Ottawa. That's a great first step. But we've also heard Ottawa say, we want to be a government of action and we need to move quickly. I think it's not going to be too long before people start gaining more and more skepticism about the impact that these policies are going to have if they continue to remain in place.
Just finally, on the Pathways Alliance and the idea of carbon capture and sequestration, something that everyone seems to be in agreement with, that this should happen. It does seem, a recent report showed that it is increasingly not going to pay off for companies unless governments get involved. Would you have the expectation that Ottawa would contribute to that project, given that it's been talking about it a fair bit?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a program in place, our Alberta Carbon Capture Incentive Program. We are leaders in CCUS. We have, I believe we're over 14 million tons of CO2 already safely and permanently stored underground with previous projects that we've had going on in the province of Alberta. We do have, like I said, our program in place to support with capital. When we look at our technology innovation and emissions reduction program, we also have ways to support that potentially through our operating costs when it comes to, that's our system of managing emissions here in Alberta. That said, the economics are a challenge when it comes to these major projects. The other thing would be policies like the federal government's ban on things like enhanced oil recovery that also further hurt the economics of those projects. So I've raised that with the federal environment minister as well. But we would, of course, expect that the federal government would step up on that front if they want to see this built. And I think we've heard that from industry loud and clear.
Minister Rebecca Schulz, nice of you to make the time on a Sunday morning for us. We appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
Okay, have a good day.
We're giving Canadians the ability to give ourselves far more than any foreign government can ever take away. We can build big, build bold, build now, build one Canadian economy.
This comes as premiers pitched their own nation-building projects at last week's First Minister's meeting, including a pipeline to the West Coast, a project the Prime Minister says he sees potential in.
That is absolutely in our interest. It provides diversification of trade partners. It provides the development of new industries. It provides economic activity across the West and into the North. So, yes, there's real potential there.
But a Western pipeline is already causing disagreement. British Columbia says another pipeline will not go forward in that province. Earlier, I spoke to Adrian Dix, British Columbia's Minister of Energy and Climate Solutions. Minister Dix, nice to see you again.
Great to be on the show.
So I want to start talking about the One Canadian Economy Bill, the legislation that includes these nation-building projects, and specifically how that might affect British Columbia. As you know, at the First Minister's meeting, the Prime Minister did mention a pipeline to the West Coast as a possibility. Certainly it's something that the Premier of Alberta would like to see, but your boss, the Premier, has said no. Is there any proposal here that British Columbia would be willing to consider?
Well, first of all, we have proposals in BC, and those proposals are shovel ready. Those proposals have private sector proponents. Those proposals generally have First Nations participation. They build the country, and we're supportive of proposals that actually exist to do that. With respect to pipelines, there is no proposal, and there's a good reason for that. We just spent $34 billion, and when I say we, I mean taxpayers, spent $34 billion on the TMX pipeline. We've seen an increase in oil exports from Alberta through BC of 367% just between 2023 and 2024. The pipeline is used at about 80%, and there is capacity to increase the value of that pipeline. So we're interested in serious proposals. We're not as interested in proposals that would cost really tens of billions of dollars of public subsidy and don't even have a private sector proponent as we speak. Okay. We're interested in doing things that affect the economy now and build BC and build Canada now.
Yeah. Okay, well, and I'll come back to the projects that you think make sense for BC, but just to go again about the pipeline, the idea, of course, behind the legislation is that it will attract someone to put a project in a pipeline, potentially, or another project on the table, and that the capital would be private capital, at least from what the Prime Minister is saying. So I realize that there's not a project there right now, but it's possible that one is created and that there is a company that advances one. So just so I'm clear, there's no scenario under which British Columbia would want another pipeline to the West Coast.
Well, look, the project doesn't make sense. We just built one. It cost $34 billion. This one would cost a lot more because remember, the TMX pipeline was a twinned route. So this would cost substantially more. There's a reason that there's not a proponent for this. It's unbelievably difficult to build. It's very problematic in terms of other projects that we're building in the province. It would cost a ton of money. And the existing pipeline, which is simpler, required a significant federal involvement. They own it. And by the way, they've been trying to sell it, as you know, Rosemary, and they haven't been able to do it. They've been trying to sell their share. So we'd prefer to talk about projects that are shovel-ready and exist and can help both British Columbia and other provinces such as Alberta right now, and that's our view.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those projects then. What in British Columbia's mind is a good nation-building project that potentially doesn't just happen inside British Columbia, but potentially goes right across the country or into another province?
Well, with respect to one of the projects we talked about is something called the North Coast Transmission Line, which opens up critical minerals in our province and economic activity in the northwest of our province, goes from Prince George to Terrace, and it's a project that exists. We're working with First Nations on right now. That's a significant project. Those critical mineral projects that we're talking about in BC have a significant impact here as well. But I just want to say this as well about other jurisdictions. We don't control what other jurisdictions put forward. They put forward proposals, tunnels under the 401 and pipeline projects that don't exist that would cost tens of billions of dollars of subsidy. That's the choice of those provinces, and I'm respectful of that. With respect to the province of Alberta and oil, we've supported a federal effort to do dredging in Burrard Inlet, because incredibly, the $34 billion pipeline that we built, you can't use it to full capacity because you can't get the boats out of the harbor, and it costs a lot of money to do so. So we've been supportive of that, which really is in support in that case of Alberta's interest. So we're supporting other jurisdictions in their efforts. We're going to continue to do that. But proposals that move goods, that build industry, are important proposals. And finally, on energy, LNG, where the first LNG is being exported from British Columbia this summer. We currently have under construction $42 billion in LNG projects in BC. There are others before us. So this is a huge opportunity for the country, including and supportive of the Alberta economy and our own. These are serious proposals that make sense for the whole country, and we got to get building. We're very supportive. Premier Eby is very aligned with the Prime Minister's vision on these things, but surely we should have projects that make sense.
The Prime Minister says that nothing will be imposed on a province, that there must be a consensus built around a project. But of course, a consensus means broad agreement. It doesn't mean everyone agrees. Do you think that that's the right approach? And for British Columbia or any other project across the country, because there will be some negotiating between jurisdictions and provinces based on the scope of projects.
Well, I'll just give you an example. We're moving significantly, as is the province of Quebec, for the electrification of our economy. It's when the Premier is now in Asia, when he goes to Japan and he goes to Korea and he goes to Malaysia and other places, it's what they want to hear. We're electrifying our economy right now to a remarkable degree. We have 10 major renewable energy projects that we've just approved, all of which have majority First Nations ownership, also a private contribution, and also a significant role for BC Hydro. This is building our country, and we've got to build now. We are not opposed to building. We are in favor of projects, and we are acting now. Not in theory, not about fanciful notions, but about real projects right here, right now, and that's what we got to keep doing.
Okay. Adrian Dix, always nice to see you. Thank you for making the time, sir.
Great to be on the show, Rosemary.
Next hour, we will hear from the federal energy minister and Alberta's environment minister for their perspectives on this piece of legislation. But already there are concerns from some Indigenous leaders about it. The bill would give the government new powers to skirt existing laws to fast track these so-called nation building projects, though the Prime Minister has said many times that the process will respect Indigenous rights and environmental standards. The Assembly of First Nations is set to hold an emergency meeting on this week. The Grand Chief of the Nishnawbe Aski Nation in Ontario is also speaking out. He's called the government's rollout of the bill a, quote, huge disappointment. And Grand Chief Alvin Fiddler joins me now from Thunder Bay, Ontario. Nice to see you, Grand Chief.
Good morning.
It's been a while. Tell me what you thought when you saw this piece of legislation. The Prime Minister says First Nations, Indigenous peoples will be consulted through the approval project, through the approval process. What are your biggest concerns?
Well, right now, our biggest concerns are the forest fires that are happening in our territory. Yesterday we supported Sandy Lake, one of the biggest communities in the Nan territory, to get them out because there's a forest fire that's moving right into their community. And Deer Lake 2 days before that, or a week before that. So we're dealing with the effects of climate change with forest fires and evacuating our community members, as we are also at the same time trying to deal with what's happening provincially with Bill 5 and now the federal piece of legislation, Bill C5. So it's a crazy time for us to be having these very serious discussions while we are trying to keep our communities safe from these fires.
I'm glad you mentioned that. The Prime Minister this morning said that he has, at the request of the Ontario government, deployed Canadian Armed Forces to help with the evacuation of people, particularly in Sandy Lake. So we're thinking about you because everyone's coping with wildfires already this season. To go back to the legislation, one of the things that it hopes to do is make this approval process go from 5 years to 2. Do you feel like that is enough time for broad consultations to happen?
Well, I mean, it's putting our communities in a very difficult position. To be expected to just jump on the train while it's moving ahead is something that is going to be very, very difficult for our communities because we have our own processes, and that's something that both Ontario and Canada don't seem to understand, is that we do have our own processes. We do have our own natural laws in terms of how we want to protect our environment, our lands, and our waters. And right now, the two seem to not be in line with each other. So it's going to be a very challenging time for us in the days and weeks ahead as we engage in conversation internally, as we prepare for engagement with both Ontario and Canada.
Well, you mentioned there Ontario, and there is this controversial law, Bill 5, that gives Ontario the ability to create these special economic zones. The Premier has pointed to your region, to the Ring of Fire, as being a priority. Certainly, it seems of interest to the federal government as well. What do you make of the way the Ontario government put that piece of legislation in place? Again, the Premier says he will consult with First Nations, but this is an intent to try and speed things up, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, we've been pretty strong and we've been pretty vocal and very clear in terms of our position with Bill 5, that we oppose it in its entirety, and that we don't accept their law. We don't accept the process that they put in place, and that we are prepared to reinstate our own systems and how we want to look after our own land and our own environment and our own waters. So that's a discussion that we will need to have as we head into the summer.
What about opportunities too, Grand Chief? That is something that certainly the federal government is talking about if there is a project that runs through a First Nations community, there is opportunity and economic benefit to be had. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that our chiefs have also said, is that they're not opposed to development. I think we all recognize the opportunities that are there with respect to critical minerals or other types of resources that are in our territory. The question, the issue is the how, and that's something that our chiefs have said, that we need to put ourselves in the driver's seat to dictate the process, how development will happen in our region.
I'll just go back to the wildfires quickly, Grand Chief. How many people have been evacuated from your region there?
I think just yesterday, Sunday Lake is one of the biggest communities in the Nan Territory. There's 3,500 people there. I think they were able to move about 3,000 people within a short period of time.
Yeah.
Yesterday afternoon and onto the nighttime, I think they were still flying people out at midnight last night.
What else do you need? Is this good news that the Canadian Armed Forces are going to be involved now?
Well, I mean, it's certainly a relief for the people of Sunday Lake, for the leadership. They were getting worried around early afternoon because there was no sign of any aircraft coming into the community, but they were able to sort of get in there relatively quickly and get a lot of the community members out within a short period of time.
Okay, well that's good to hear. Let's be in touch about the projects though moving forward. We'll talk more about it. Thank you so much for your time today, Grand Chief. Appreciate it. The One Canadian Economy legislation tabled on Friday is in part meant to Trump-proof this country. The Prime Minister says it will make the country an economic superpower.
Our government's One Canadian Economy legislation, a bill with two equally important components, designed to create one Canadian economy out of 13.
Our test is whether or not legislation is perfect, but whether it is better than the way things are. And that's what we will be looking at as we study this newly introduced bill over the next few days.
So the Prime Minister says he wants this new bill to be passed into law before Canada Day, July 1st. Will he have the support to get it done? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Ian Bailey is a reporter for the Globe and Mail in Ottawa. Catherine Cullen is the host of CBC Radio's The House. She's also in Ottawa. And Tyler Dawson is an Alberta correspondent for the National Post. He's in Edmonton. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Let's talk about the goals of this new piece of legislation and whether they are perhaps too ambitious to try and really fundamentally shake up the Canadian economy. Ian?
Well, this is, this government, this Prime Minister is trying to do things that haven't been done before in terms of projects, agreement with provinces and territories, First Nations. But I guess we have an unusual president in the United States, and so there's an unusual pressure on Canada to move in these areas. And that may provide some momentum for Mr. Carney to sort of convince stakeholders, First Nations, provinces and others to go along with some of the things he wants to do in this bill. But he's going to have to do things that other governments haven't been able to do. Anything is possible. The time and the circumstances may just sort of provide the opportunity to sort of move along on some of these issues. But it's a 50-50 at this point.
Yeah, and I know the Prime Minister made it clear, Catherine, that there has to be a consensus, which doesn't mean everybody has to agree. It just means most people have to agree. But even off the top of this show, you heard from BC and the Grand Chief. There are areas where they are just not interested in going down the same road as the federal government.
That's right. And I mean, Danielle Smith has set a high bar too, right? Suggesting that a pipeline is the only way for her to really see this as a success, that that's what's necessary for national unity. Now, lying underneath all of that, Rosemary, though, is a lot of projects where there is a lot of consensus, right? Even when we talk writ large about some of the things that the various levels of government seem ready to move forward with. We talk about corridors. Those corridors can contain a lot of things. I think it is clear. I was in Saskatoon hearing from many of the premiers. There's a real desire desire to get moving. And there are a lot of projects on the table that are not necessarily all that controversial. You talk about beefing up the energy grid. Certainly, there's the question of the potential for conflict between the various provinces, between the provinces and the federal government. And I think particularly we have to ask questions about how this is going to work when it comes to First Nations leaders. But there's also just the fact that despite how high Mark Carney has set the bar, these projects take time. I mean, it's 2 years for regulatory approval. It could take many, many years to get some of these big things built. The country does need them, though, when we do talk about things like electricity, critical minerals. It's a question of what is successful.
Tyler, I mean, Catherine's right. There are a lot of projects that are not pipelines and where there will be buy-in, but the pipeline conversation continues to take up an awful lot of space.
Yeah, and I think from the perspective out west, rightly or wrongly, there is the view that the federal government, the federal Liberal government in particular, has been hostile towards development for the past 10 or so years. People will point out that TMX got built with the support of the federal government, and people will counter and say, well, look at Energy East, Northern Gateway, Keystone, whoever's at fault for those things failing. My sense of this is that there's going to need to be some sort of rapid progress on getting things done to sort of shift the perspective out here. In other words, words and legislation are maybe not going to be quite enough to make some of the premiers out west happy, mainly Danielle Smith and Scott Moe. So I think, and on the 2-year sort of timeline they're talking about, I mean, industry out here has been asking for 6 months. So we're perhaps limping towards a shorter timeline, but perhaps not what industry wants. So I think that not to use a cliche so early in the morning, but the proof is going to be in the pudding on this one, I think.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, Ian. What Catherine and Tyler both said there, the timeline. Like 2 years is supposed to be faster than it's happening now, and the government's hoping that a lot of this is going to happen with private capital, not with federal money. I don't get the impression Mark Carney wants to buy another pipeline the way Justin Trudeau did.
Absolutely not. And 2 years is a long time for a minority government.
That's right. Yeah.
A long time for a government that's really on the knife's edge here in terms of its, its clout, its power, its ability to influence the agenda. The Prime Minister has to show that he can make progress on this in the very short term, because he's staked everything on. He's staked a lot on a lot of issues, but he certainly staked a lot on getting things done here. And 2 years is a long, long time for this government.
Yeah, that's a good point. Catherine, we also heard from the Conservative leader there off the top who says, we're going to have a look at it, discuss it in caucus. It would be very difficult, I would imagine, for Conservatives to get in the way of any legislation that's trying to speed these kinds of things up.
Yeah, but there are a couple of things going on. I mean, the Conservatives can ultimately support this legislation and still say, as Danielle Smith has been saying, great, but it's not good enough, which is sort of the Conservative refrain right now also on matters like internal trade. There's also just the question of who doesn't love talking about process, Rosie, but not just the process of getting these things built, the process of getting this legislation through the House. I know there's great enthusiasm on the part of the Prime Minister, but committees matter. There are questions about how the Senate is going to function under Mark Carney. He wants to move at speeds previously thought impossible, getting us through the House of Commons and the Senate in 2 weeks. That's, I don't know if it's an example that's going to have Canadians like jumping onto their feet, but it's a start in terms of proving how quickly you can get things done. Yeah, especially a Senate where you don't control what they do,
and there's no Liberal caucus, and so you're kind of stuck. Tyler, if it were to happen in the timeline that the Prime Minister has given, how reassuring would that be for some of the industries out in Alberta about sort of the direction the country is headed in?
Yeah, I think the direction of it would be reassuring. I think what that process is going to look like is maybe a little bit questionable. How is this going to continue to interact with, say, the Impact Assessment Act? How are, there's that office, I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called, that sort of a major projects office, I think, that is going to be the single point of contact. And how is that going to work? Is this adding more as opposed to taking away sort of some red tape and procedural kind of stuff? So again, I think that the signals are maybe moving in the right direction, and I expect that's what industry is going to feel. But then we're going to be in new ground, right? We're going to be testing this slightly new regime. And again, we'll sort of see how that plays out. So I think that's going to be one of the lingering sort of concerns and questions, even if this does get done in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, we're going to leave it there for this hour. Thank you, all of you. Go grab a coffee, a tea, whatever you need to get through to the next hour. We'll see you then. Thanks, Catherine, Ian, and Tyler.